With the apple pie's golden crust still steaming, I set it on the kitchen counter. The smell of nutmeg and cinnamon flooded the air, but my heart wasn't in it. I couldn't help but glance at the wall clock. Lauren would be here any minute with little Amelia. "Charlotte, you've outdone yourself," Mike said as he rounded the corner and gave me a cheek kiss. "Lauren's favorite, right?" I forced a smile and nodded. "I'm just hoping she'll eat more this time." When the doorbell rang, Mike answered it. I straightened my apron and inhaled deeply, getting ready for what lay ahead. "Grandma!" Little feet patterned through the house, echoing Amelia's joyful squeal. I knelt to pick her up, feeling her warmth and her lovely hair scent. I squeezed her and said, "There's my girl. My, how you have grown." With a smile that didn't meet her eyes, Lauren appeared at the doorway. She said, "Hi, Mom," in a quiet voice. I put Amelia down and went to hug my daughter. She stiffened somewhat as I did. It was a warm spring day, but when I pulled back, I saw that she was tugging at her long sleeves. "Lauren, sweetie, aren't you uncomfortable in that?" I asked, trying not to seem too serious. She gave a head shake. "Mom, I'm doing well. We appreciate you having us over." We made our way to the living room, where I observed Lauren hunched over on the edge of the sofa with a tight posture. Ignoring the underlying tension, Amelia talked happily about her recent first-grade trips. "Who wants some pie?" Mike inquired, sounding excessively happy. Lauren's eyes got bigger. "Oh, Dad, no thanks. I'm not that hungry." Mike and I looked at each other. I nudged Lauren. "It's your favorite one, just a tiny bit." After a pause, she nodded. "Okay, maybe just a little." I sat on the couch with Lauren as Mike went to cut the pie. "How are things, sweetheart?" I made a gentle inquiry. She shrugged. "All right. You know how it is. Busy." She backed away when I extended my hand to touch her arm. I noticed it then, a tinge of purple showing through her sleeve. "Lauren, what happened to your arm?" I asked, my voice almost audible above a whisper. She withdrew, pulling her sleeve downward. "It's not a big deal, Mom. I just fell." After Mike came back with the pie, we ate in tense silence. Though Amelia, oh my goodness, chatted away the silence, I couldn't take my eyes off Lauren. She nibbled on her food, hardly finishing a mouthful. I kept a close eye on my daughter as the afternoon went on, seeing how she would react to strange noises, how her face would tense each time she checked her phone, and how her eyes would light up when she saw Amelia. I finally gave up trying to hold back as Lauren prepared to depart. While Mike diverted Amelia's attention in the living area, I trapped her in the hallway. "Lauren, honey," I murmured, "is everything okay at home with James?" Tears filled her eyes. She pleaded, "Mom, please don't ask me that." "However, I must go," she murmured, her voice quivering. "James will be wondering where we are." Mike looked at me as she gathered Amelia and made her way to the door. There I saw an anxiety that reflected mine. I responded, "Wait," and reached for a Tupperware container. "Take some pie home with you for later." Lauren paused, then gave a nod. "Thanks, Mom," she mumbled. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice as I watched them drive off. I was resolved to find out what the terrible problem was. I turned to face my spouse and said, "Mike, we need to talk about Lauren." His expression was serious. "Charlotte, I am aware. I also saw it," Mike remarked. I inhaled deeply, my thoughts already racing over what to do next. I was positive that I would no longer allow myself to witness my daughter's suffering. It was a nervous trip to Lauren's place. Mike's knuckles were white from the steering wheel, and my bag strap was causing me to fidget. Amelia had fallen asleep in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Upon entering Lauren's driveway, I observed James's vehicle was not there, a minor relief. "I'll get Amelia," Mike stated in a tense tone. I gave a nod and made my way to the front door. When the second knock came, Lauren opened her eyes wide in shock. "Mom, what are you doing here?" My heart ached to see her when I stepped inside. The bruise on her arm was much more noticeable in the glaring light of the hallway. I whispered, "We couldn't let you go home like this, sweetheart. We're worried about you." Lauren's expression twisted. "You're not supposed to be here. James will return home shortly." Mike entered with an asleep Amelia. He questioned, "Where should I put her?" Lauren muttered, "Upstairs, second door on the left." Leading Lauren to the living room, I watched as Mike carried Amelia upstairs. I took her hands in mine as we sat on the couch. "Lauren, honey, we need to talk about what's going on." Tears were streaming down her cheeks as she shook her head. "Mom, there is nothing to discuss. Everything is all right." "This isn't okay." I touched her wounded arm tenderly. "Has he done this before?" All I needed to know was Lauren's silence. A mixture of sorrow and rage surged in my gut. How much time had this been ongoing? Why hadn't I noticed the signs? Mike returned downstairs, his expression gloomy. He said, "Amelia's still sleeping. Lauren, you won't be abandoned here. Pack your bag. We're taking you and Amelia home with us." Lauren's terrified eyes grew wider. "No, I'm not allowed to go. James will be angry. He will go after us." "Let him try." Mike scowled. I gave him a stern look. "Lauren, you have our support. We don't need to make a decision just yet, but if possible, please allow us to stay for a few days. We can explain that we are here to assist Amelia." After hesitating, Lauren slowly nodded. She said in a whisper, "Okay, but only for a few days." I couldn't get rid of the impression that we were sitting on a powder keg as we got comfortable. Lauren's heart leaped at every passing car. Her face became pale every time her phone buzzed. Mike had fallen asleep in the armchair, and Amelia was fast asleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Lauren, our mugs of tea getting colder. Lauren opened up at a late hour that evening. Lauren quietly remarked, "It wasn't always like this," as she peered into her mug. "James was incredibly considerate and attentive when we first got married. However, afterwards..." As she drifted off, I extended my hand across the table to give her a quick squeeze. "What happened, sweetheart?" Lauren drew a nervous breath. "It was minor at first. If I spent too much money at the grocery store, or if dinner wasn't ready in time, he would become irritated. Following that, he inquired about my whereabouts by looking through my phone. Before I realized it, I was constantly being cautious. My daughter hurt so much in my heart." "When did he start hitting you?" The word made Lauren wince. "It was roughly a year ago the first time. I forgot to pick up his dry cleaning and he was drunk. The following day he expressed regret and promised it wouldn't occur again. However, it happened and grew worse." I tried not to cry, wanting to be strong for Lauren. "Why didn't you tell us?" With fear and guilt in her eyes, she glanced up at me. I felt afraid and ashamed. James threatened to take Amelia away if I ever informed anyone, saying that no one would ever believe me. We heard a car pull into the driveway at that very moment. Lauren's face became pale. "He's home," she said. The main door burst open. "Lauren," James's voice filled the house with a boom. "Where the hell are you?" I got up and moved to stand between Lauren and the kitchen door. Mike jolted awake in the living room, leaping to his feet at the sound of James's approaching footsteps. I braced myself for what was about to happen. Either way, I thought, this has to end now. With furious and bloodshot eyes, James stormed into the kitchen, darting between Lauren, Mike, and myself. His words were a little slurred as he growled, "What the hell is going on here?" I remained firm and positioned myself in between Lauren and James. "James, we're simply stopping by. There's no reason to panic." With a frightening stride forward, he sneered, "Coming over at midnight? Charlotte, please don't lie to me. Mike took a step to stand next to me, gritting his teeth. Keep your voice down, James. Our daughter is our concern, which is why we are here. James's expression twisted with anger. Are you worried? You are not allowed. We are fully allowed, I broke off, maintaining a steady tone. We are her parents. We also won't leave her by yourself with you. James moved forward one more step, but Mike got in the way. James, back off. You don't scare us. James balled his fists at his sides. Do you really believe you can just rip her from my arms? Do you believe you could come in here and play the hero? We're not playing, I declared resolutely. This is about Lauren and Amelia's safety. Your daughter, my wife is her name. This is not your concern, James angrily remarked. Lauren's voice came from behind me, shaking. James, please, you'll wake Amelia. Lauren caught his gaze, and I noticed a moment of panic flash across her face. He growled, You told them, didn't you? After everything I've done for you, you unworthy shit. That's enough, Mike bellowed, interrupting James. You won't speak to her that way in our presence. There was a noticeable tension in the space. Even though my heart was pounding and I could feel Lauren trembling behind me, I wasn't going to back down. James, I continued in a composed yet forceful voice, I believe you should go. When everyone has had some time to sleep, we can talk about this in the morning. With a rough, bitter laugh, he laughed. Go? This is my home. It is you who must leave. At that moment, a tiny voice emerged from the staircase. Daddy? As we all turned to look, we saw Amelia drowsily rubbing her eyes. James felt a little less confident at her sight. Hey, princess, he replied, sounding unexpectedly soft. Go to your bed. Everything is all right. Amelia looked at the scene, her eyes widening. Why is everyone yelling? Lauren moved fast to grab Amelia. It's all right, my love. Grandpa and Grandmother dropped in for a visit. Let's return you to your bed. James became distant from Amelia as Lauren carried her upstairs. He stood up straight and smoothed down his ragged shirt. His voice was calm and low as he continued. I think you should go. Mike opened his lips to protest, but I touched his arm instead. I replied, We'll head out, but we'll be back in the morning. James, we still have more to talk about. With a curt nod, he moved aside to allow us to pass. Lauren returned downstairs, her face dull as we finished gathering our belongings. She said, Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. Perhaps you should leave. Tomorrow, I'll give you a call. Lauren, are you sure we can stay if you need us to? I asked. She gave a head shake. It's all right. Amelia is upset. Now I have to give her my whole attention. We reluctantly bid each other goodbye. I had the unshakable impression that we were committing an awful mistake as we made our way to the car. The burden of what we had seen hung heavily between us on the somber trip home. At last, Mike started talking. Charlotte, we can't abandon her there. You witnessed his nature. It's not secure. I nodded, thinking quickly. I understand, but we are unable to make her go. She must want to leave. Mike gripped the steering wheel more firmly. If she doesn't, what then? Shall we just wait for him to inflict serious harm on her or Amelia? I felt my stomach turn at the thought of it. No, I firmly said. That is not going to happen. We require a plan. I decided as we pulled into our driveway. I'm going to spend a few days with them. I will inform James that it's for Amelia's benefit. In this manner, I can track the situation. Mike had a doubtful expression. Is that safe? I raised my shoulders properly. I must make an effort. Lauren won't be left alone in this. That night when we went to bed, I couldn't fall asleep. I kept thinking about Lauren's terrified expression. After 3 days of being with Lauren and Amelia, the tension in the house felt oppressive. James's moods changed wildly, ranging from a sugar-coated sweetness to a barely contained rage. Something needed to shift quickly. I had no idea that the days ahead would put us all to the test in ways we could not have predicted. I watched helplessly as Lauren avoided him, her eyes darting back and forth to see how he would react. I heard high voices coming from upstairs one morning, while Amelia and I were in the kitchen. James's tone had angered me, and my heart raced. I tried to maintain my composure as I said, "Amelia, sweetie, why don't you go watch some cartoons in the living room?" After quickly putting Amelia in her playpen, I ran upstairs. The shouts got louder as I approached. I slipped up the stairs, and my nurse's instinct alerted me as soon as she was out of sight. "You think I don't know what you're up to?" James gave a hissy voice. "Your mother's been poking around, hasn't she?" "No, James, please," Lauren begged. "She's just here to help with Amelia." A heavy impact startled me. I bounded inside the room without thinking. James was towering over Lauren, who was lying on the ground holding her arm. "Get away from her!" I yelled, shocking even myself with the intensity of my tone. James spun around, fury twisted in his expression. "Charlotte, this is none of your concern. Leave my home now." I remained firm and put myself in the way of him and Lauren. "I'm not going anywhere, and if you lay another hand on my daughter, I'll call the police." I feared for a second that he might hit me too, but then a strange calmness flowed over his expression. "All right," he answered coldly. "Have it your way." With his keys in hand, he stormed out of the house. I ran to Lauren's side as soon as he was gone. "How are you doing, my love? Show me your arm." She winced as I looked at the bruise that was starting to emerge. She said, "Mom, I'm so sorry you had to see that," as she wiped away her tears. I held back my tears as I assisted her in standing up. "Lauren, please don't apologize. You are not to blame for this. However, you and Amelia must leave the area right away." It was the doorbell ringing. With a look of horror on her face, Lauren froze. "What if it's James?" I gave her a tight squeeze. "Stay in this spot. I'll check." I was shocked to see Lauren's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Robert, at the door instead of James. It was clear from her tense attitude that this was not a polite call. "Mrs. Lancaster," she said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." She said. I faked a laugh. "No, Mrs. Robert, not at all. How may I help you?" She squinted around me, attempting to peek inside the house. "Well, I couldn't help but note that Lauren hasn't attended the last 3 neighborhood committee meetings, and there's been quite a bustle around here lately. People are beginning to discuss." Her poorly disguised curiosity made my blood boil, but I maintained my cool. "Mrs. Robert, Lauren have been feeling under the weather. She'll soon resume her regular activities, I'm sure." Mrs. Robert's gaze grew strained. "I see. Tell her that marriage requires work, please. It's not all sunshine and roses. The occasional bump in the way shouldn't discourage her." I choked back a sharp reaction, realizing how deeply embedded the issue was at that moment. It wasn't just James. The entire neighborhood was ready to ignore mistreatment. "Mrs. Robert, I appreciate your concern," I firmly responded. "I'll be sure to pass along your message." I leaned against the door as I shut it, thoughts whizzing by. Now that Lauren and Amelia were out of the way, I understood we had more enemies than simply James. We were up against a whole way of thinking that put maintaining appearances ahead of the safety of women. I discovered Lauren in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she held a mug of tea. She muttered, "Mom, what are we going to do?" I made up my mind then, staring at my daughter's haunted eyes and damaged face. I said, "We're leaving," in a firm voice full of new resolve. "Now, Amelia and you should pack a bag. I'm going to call your dad." Lauren nodded and hurried upstairs, moving quickly. With a beating heart, I took out my phone and dialed Mike's number. It was time to put into action our strategy, consequences, and all. I just hoped that it wasn't too late. We froze, terrified that James might come back, while Lauren packed their belongings, and we could hear the distant car engine and creak of the floorboards. Though Mike was on his way, the minutes seemed to drag on forever. Lauren trembled and murmured, "Mom, what if he comes back before we leave?" I pressed my own fear down as I grasped her hand. "Sweetheart, we got this. He can't harm you in my presence again." Amelia stepped in the doorway, holding her favorite plush bunny. "Why are we packing, Mama? Are we heading somewhere?" With a forced smile, Lauren knelt beside her daughter. "Yes, my dear. We're going to spend some time with Grandpa and Grandma. That sounds like fun, doesn't it?" Amelia joyfully nodded, and I could see the hurt in Lauren's eyes. Telling a 7-year-old that you're leaving her father must be difficult. My phone buzzed just then. Mike texted saying, "Here, I parked the car around the corner. Move quickly." I took a deep breath and said, "Okay, it's time to go." With our baggage in our presence, we tiptoed down the stairs. I glanced out the front window, looking for James anywhere on the street. It appeared like all was well. "Okay," I said in a whisper. "Let's move quickly and quietly." As soon as we went outside onto the porch, I had a fleeting hope that we would survive. And I heard the high-pitched voice of Mrs. Robert. "Lauren? Charlotte? Where are you heading so quickly?" I looked over and saw the nosy neighbor Power approaching us with a curious expression on her face. My blood ran cold at the sound of an engine roaring before I could reply. The tires on James's car screeched as it rounded the turn. "Run!" I yelled. After Lauren gathered Amelia, we quickly made our way to Mike's vehicle. Behind us, James's enraged yells could be heard getting closer with every step. James had just caught up as we arrived at the car. Mike leaped out, putting himself in the way of James and me. "Get in the car now!" As I assisted Lauren and Amelia into the rear car, Mike exclaimed. James threw himself at Mike, and the two men fought. I was horrified to see how my husband, who is older, was able to compete with the younger man. "You can't take them!" James gave a yell. "They're mine!" A part of me snapped. I rushed at James, releasing years of suppressed resentment and shame. "They are not your property!" My voice resounded across the neighborhood as I yelled. "You lost any right to them the moment you laid a hand on my daughter." James's eyes grew wide with disbelief before becoming dangerously tight. "Charlotte, you have no idea what you're doing. For this, I'll ruin you all." A few others had gathered by now, Mrs. Robert among them. I noticed the look of horror on their faces as they began to realize what had been going on behind closed doors. "Go ahead," I murmured calmly, my heart pounding despite my words. "Share your actions with everyone. Let them see the true you." James seemed to hesitate for a brief period. Then he pounced at me, growling. Mike stopped him and tackled him to the ground. "Go!" Mike yelled. "I can handle this. Take them from here." For a brief moment, I wavered between supporting my spouse and keeping my daughter safe. However, after seeing Lauren's scared expression in the rearview mirror, I knew what I had to do. Leaning over and leaving Mike to handle James and the dumbfounded bystanders, I leaped into the driver's seat and drove off. Lauren collapsed in the back seat, holding Amelia tight as we hurried to our house. Though we felt overwhelmed by the event, I knew we had made the first move in the direction of a fresh start, free from James's cruelty. I reached back and took Lauren's hand firmly as she sobbed and apologized. "Lauren, this is not your fault." I comforted her. "We're going to get through this together." My thoughts were racing as I drove. Lauren and Amelia got their freedom, but at what price? Mike remained there, facing the critical neighbors and James. I could hear James threatening to take this very seriously. A sense of grim determination settled upon me as I tightened my grasp on the steering wheel. I was confident that no matter what happened, no matter what James tried to do to us, I would do all in my power to keep my family safe. The days that followed our escape were a haze of rage, tiredness, and terror. As Lauren and Amelia got comfortable in our guest room, I could tell our nightmare was far from finished by the haunted expression in my daughter's eyes. First came the phone calls, constant menacing calls from James that made Lauren shiver at the sound of the receiver. Then the texts started to come in, sweet appeals mingled with frightening threats. I intended to discard the phone, but our attorney suggested that we preserve everything as proof. People are saying things, Lauren murmured one night in the darkness of the kitchen, her face pale with anxiety. Awful things. A shiver went down my spine. What kind of things, sweetheart? My blood boiled to the surface when she showed me her social media profile. Posts from coworkers, old friends, and neighbors all questioned Lauren's morality and suitability as a mother. It was obvious how James had manipulated the community to turn against her. "He's telling everyone I'm unstable," Lauren gasped. "That I abandoned him. That I'm keeping Amelia from him out of spite." I gave her a strong hug as I felt her body tremble from silent tears. "Lauren, we'll fight this. We'll reveal the reality to them." But in our little town, the truth seemed to be a slippery thing. James's charm and the community's unwillingness to accept that such a nice man could be abusive caused rumors to spread like wildfire. Amelia's tearful return from school was the last straw. "The other kids said Daddy doesn't want me anymore," she was crying. "They said it's because Mommy's crazy." A part of me broke. I had watched James ruin my daughter's life for far too long, watching in helplessness. Not anymore. I got in touch with my former friend Bethany, who works as a professional counselor specializing in cases of domestic abuse. After I gave her the rundown, she stated gravely, "Charlotte, there's something you need to know about James." I was completely shocked by what she disclosed. James had a track record of seducing, dominating, and mistreating women. He'd done this before, with a different family, in a different town. Everything fell into place. His deliberate public image cultivation and his insistence on removing Lauren from her support network. I yelled, "We need to expose him." My anger and determination were visible in my voice. After a moment of hesitation, Bethany spoke. "Some of James's former victims go to a support group for victims of abuse. It could have a great impact if Lauren agreed to talk." I was afraid of the concept. It was like throwing Lauren to the wolves, subjecting her to further attention and criticism. However, there was a light in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years when I brought up the topic with her. "I'll do it," she resolutely stated. "For Amelia, for myself, for all the women he might hurt if we don't stop him." We prepared Lauren's statement and gathered evidence with great care. Mike contacted his former co-worker Harry, a retired attorney, who agreed to assist us in navigating the upcoming legal maze. James took the most outrageous step yet the evening before the support group meeting. Arriving at our door, he was all charm and remorse, audible enough for Mrs. Robert to hear while she was pretending to water her already soaking peonies. "I simply want to speak with my wife and daughter," he begged, attempting to control how people saw him. I refused to back down, obstructing the entrance. "James, they don't want to see you. I'm going to contact the cops, so leave now." For an instant, his mask came off and showed the anger underneath. Hissing, "You'll regret this, Charlotte. I'll destroy all of you." I had a moment of crippling anxiety as he stormed off. But what if this isn't possible? What if James has too much strength, intelligence, or connections? But then I heard Lauren's clear, steady voice from behind me. "Mom, we got this. We must." I looked over and saw my daughter, tall, with Amelia's hand in hers. I realized at that same moment that we had already won the biggest war. Lauren's voice trembled as she spoke, but it got stronger as she went on. Her statement, "My name is Lauren Hale, and I am a survivor of domestic abuse," echoed through the hostile community center atmosphere. The room uttered a collective gasp. I have seen looks of disbelief, doubt, and hatred flash across faces, but Lauren kept her bravery evident. He cut me off from my friends and family. Everything in my life was under his control. Who I talked to, what I dressed, and how much money I spent. And he began punching me as if that wasn't enough. I sensed a change in the atmosphere as Lauren described her terrifying experiences. The initial disbelief was replaced by dread and compassion. Even Mrs. Roberts' stiff posture loosened, her face displaying a mixture of awareness and disbelief. Lauren's statements carried a lot of weight, effectively describing the psychological and physical violence she had experienced. With every utterance, James's well-built mask appeared to crumble, revealing the reality that existed behind closed doors. I was filled with pride and admiration for her bravery as she talked. Standing tall despite the criticism and attention, she was taking back her voice. There was a startled quiet when Lauren finished. Then there was loud clapping, a mix of respect, solidarity, and support. Many walked up to Lauren and congratulated her, saying they were sorry they hadn't noticed the indications before. It was an emotional moment, a rejection of James's conduct and a confirmation of her bravery. Lauren felt strength in that room, surrounded by people who had doubted her and others who now stood with her. And I knew that no matter what occurred next, Amelia and I would face it together, stronger than ever, as I stood by her side and held her hand. Then arrived the time we had been waiting for. After inhaling deeply, Lauren remarked, "And I'm not James's first victim." Murmurs erupted in the room. Lauren and I met eyes, and I nodded encouragingly. She went on to describe the abuse James had experienced in past relationships, including the details Bethany had discovered. Abruptly, a voice rang out from the rear of the room and said, "She's correct. He treated me the same way." A woman rose to her feet, determination and pain engraved on her face. After Lauren concluded her statement, 5 more ladies got up, each telling a terrifyingly identical tale to Lauren's. The space took on a very different vibe. People's faces lit up as they pieced together the truth, and I could see it. James's painstakingly built shell was collapsing in front of our eyes. Lauren was about to finish when the doors flew open. James barged in, his angry face twisted. With a yell, "You lying bitch!" he sprang at Lauren. Everything moved slowly. I jumped up, but Mike moved more quickly. After grabbing James, he gave him a grounding. As Mike and 3 other men restrained James, the room erupted in chaos. I ran over to stand by Lauren. Despite her trembling, she maintained her poise and fixed her gaze on James. She proclaimed, "You don't control me anymore," over the din. "I'm not afraid of you." Minutes later, the cops showed up, alerted by Bethany's quick thinking. As they escorted James away in handcuffs, the realization of our collective accomplishment finally settled on me. We had let the world see James for who he really was. We had given his victims a voice. We were back in command. But I knew our fight was far from finished as I hugged Lauren tight. Lauren fell into my arms, tears welling up in her eyes. It would be necessary to inform Amelia, who had been staying with a friend during the meeting. Not to mention the prolonged healing process for Lauren and the other survivors, there were legal challenges ahead. I felt an odd mix of excitement and tiredness as we emerged from the community center, surrounded by a mix of supporters and shell-shocked neighbors. The war had not ended, even though we had won a significant battle. Lauren's determined yet teary look gave me confidence that we could handle whatever lay ahead. We'd destroyed the illusions, broken the stillness, and taken the first step toward real liberation. Although the road ahead would not be easy, there was hope for the first time in years. Our kitchen was filled with the aroma of apples and cinnamon, a smell that had formerly caused terror but was now associated with healing. I observed Lauren's confident and at ease movements as she gently took the golden brown pie out of the oven. Amelia sat at the counter, anticipating her slice with excitement shining in her eyes. Lauren was slicing the pie when someone rang the doorbell. Old habits die hard, so I experienced a brief panic attack, but Lauren's composed smile gave me comfort. She answered, "Mrs. Robert is most likely the one." I invited her over. When I opened the door, our once critical neighbor was carrying a bouquet. Her voice was gentler than I had ever heard when she remarked, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I answered with sincerity. "Please come in." Mrs. Robert came in, and I was struck by how much had changed. The same woman who had formerly encouraged rumors about Lauren was now working for a local support group for victims of domestic abuse. Mrs. Robert, Mike, Lauren, Amelia, and I sat around the table. The conversation flowed effortlessly as we enjoyed the pie, mixed with loving laughs from Lauren and giggles from Amelia. "I'm excited to start my new teaching job next week," Lauren declared with pride in her eyes. The elementary school was so understanding about everything. Squeezing her hand, Mike extended his arm. "They're lucky to have you, sweetheart." I was struck by a flood of emotion as I scanned the table. Despite everything that we had gone through, we were now stronger and closer than ever. Although the path had been difficult, witnessing Lauren's determination and courage gave me great pride and optimism for the future. The brief silence was broken by Amelia's voice. "Mommy, can we visit Daddy soon?" There was silence in the room as everyone focused on Lauren. For a moment, her face tensed, but then she inhaled deeply. "Remember what we discussed, honey? Daddy is now receiving help, so we must be patient with him. Indeed, we can visit him when it's safe." Despite everything James had done, Lauren's compassion and strength amazed me. As long as James followed his court-mandated therapy, she was committed to supporting Amelia in having supervised contact with her father. Mrs. Robert turned to Lauren as the evening drew to a close, and she got ready to go in a thick, emotional voice. "I should apologize to you. I ought to have noticed what was going on. I should have offered assistance." Lauren gave the elderly woman a tender hug. "Now you're lending a hand," she whispered. That's what matters. Lauren, Mike, and I enjoyed peacefulness in the living room after our visitors had left and Amelia had gone to bed. "Without you two, I couldn't have accomplished this," Lauren remarked, tears shining in her eyes. "You saved us." Mike softly shook his head. "Lauren, no. You have spared yourself. We merely protected your back." I extended my hand to grab Lauren's. "That's what family members do," I uttered quietly. "We stand together, no matter what." I was filled with a deep sense of calmness as I gazed at my daughter, who was strong, resilient, and at last free. The nightmare had ended. We had conquered our enemies, broken through the stillness, and taken back our own lives. There would still be difficulties, because abuse leaves permanent scars that take time to heal. However, I was absolutely certain that we would confront any challenge together. We said our goodbyes, and as I got into bed next to Mike, I thought back on our adventure. Our journey began with a family crushed by terror and lies. We were stronger together than we had ever been. I closed my eyes, appreciating the unbreakable links of love and second chances. New experiences, difficulties, and chances for development will await us tomorrow. For now, though, everything in our world seemed to be going well. The air was heavy with the pleasant smell of apple pie, not a sign of suffering, but of better times to come.